Hello, and welcome to Classic Lit Storytime. This is the second episode and the second chapter of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground. So here at Classic Lit Storytime, we explore themes related to the darker side of human nature, the things that people are a little less inclined to talk about, but that the world would be a much better place if we were more inclined to talk about them, perhaps. So, welcome to Classic Lit Storytime. I'm Imogen Sharma, your curator, narrator, and commentator. And as I said, we're on chapter 2 now, so I will jump straight in, and then afterwards we'll pour a beautiful cup of tea and have a chat about what we've felt while reading the chapter. So, I want now to tell you, gentlemen, whether you care to hear it or not, why I could not even become an insect. I tell you solemnly that I have many times tried to become an insect, but I was not equal even to that. I swear, gentlemen, that to be too conscious is an illness, a real thoroughgoing illness. For man's everyday needs, it would have been quite enough to have the ordinary human consciousness. That is, half or quarter of the amount which falls to the lot of a cultivated man of our unhappy 19th century, especially one who has the fatal ill luck to inhabit Petersburg, the most theoretical and intentional town on the whole terrestrial globe. There are intentional and unintentional towns, you see. It would have been quite enough, for instance, to have the consciousness by which also direct persons and men of action live. I bet you think I'm writing this all from affectation, to be witty at the expense of men of action, and what is more, that from ill-bred affectation I am clanking a sword like my officer. But gentlemen, whoever can pride himself on his diseases and even swagger over them? Though, after all, everyone does do that. People do pride themselves on their diseases, and I do, maybe more than anyone. We will not dispute it. My contention was absurd, but yet I am firmly persuaded that a great deal of consciousness, every sort of consciousness, in fact, is a disease. I stick to that. Let us leave that too for a minute. Tell me this. Why does it happen that at the very moments when I am most capable of feeling every refinement of all that is sublime and beautiful, as they used to say at one time, it would, as though of design, happen to me not only to feel, but to do such ugly things, such that, well, in short, actions that all perhaps commit, but which, as though purposely, occurred to me at the very time when I was most conscious that they ought not to be committed. The more conscious I was of goodness and of all that was sublime and beautiful, the more deeply I sank into my mire, and the more ready I was to sink in it altogether. But the chief point was that all this, as it were, not accidental in me, but as though it were bound to be so. It was as though it were my most normal condition, and not in the least disease or depravity, so that at last all desire in me to struggle against this depravity passed. It ended by my almost believing, perhaps actually believing, that this was perhaps my normal condition. But at first, in the beginning, what agonies I endured in that struggle. I did not believe it was the same with other people. And all my life I hid this fact about myself as a secret. I was ashamed. Even now perhaps I am ashamed. I got to the point of feeling a sort of secret, abnormal, despicable enjoyment in returning home to my corner on some disgusting Petersburg night, acutely conscious that that day I had committed a loathsome action again. That what was could never be undone, and secretly, inwardly gnawing at myself for it, tearing and consuming myself, till at last the bitterness turned into a sort of shameful, accursed sweetness. And at last into positive, real enjoyment. Yes, into enjoyment, into enjoyment. I insist upon that. I have spoken of this because I keep wanting to know for a fact whether other people feel such enjoyment. I will explain. The enjoyment was just from the too intense consciousness of one's own degradation. It was from feeling oneself that one had reached the last barrier, that it was horrible, but that it could not be otherwise, that there was no escape for you, that you could never become a different man, that even if time and faith were still left to you to change into something different, you would most likely not wish to change. Or, if you did wish to, even then you would do nothing, because perhaps in reality, there was nothing for you to change into. And the worst of it was, at the root of it all, that it was all in accord with the normal fundamental laws of over-acute consciousness, and with the inertia that was the direct result of those laws, and that consequently one was not only able to change, but could do absolutely nothing. Thus, it would follow, as a result of acute consciousness, that one is not to blame in being a scoundrel. As though that were any consolation to the scoundrel once he has come to realise that he is actually a scoundrel. But enough. Ugh. I've talked a lot of nonsense, but what have I explained? How is enjoyment in this way to be explained? But I will explain it. I will get to the bottom of it. That is why I have taken up my pen. I, for instance, have a great deal of amour propre. I am suspicious and prone to take offence as a humpback or a dwarf. But upon my word, I sometimes have had moments when if I had happened to be slapped in the face, I should perhaps have been positively glad of it. I say in earnest that I should probably have been able to discover even that in a peculiar sort of enjoyment, the enjoyment, of course, of despair. But in despair, there are the most intense enjoyments, especially when one is acutely conscious of the hopelessness of one's position. And when one is slapped in the face, why then the consciousness of being rubbed up into a pulp would positively overwhelm one. The worst of it is, look at it which way one will, it still turns out that I was always the most to blame in everything. And what is most humiliating of all, to blame for no fault of my own, but, so to say, through the laws of nature. In the first place, to blame myself because I am cleverer than any of the people surrounding me. I've always considered myself cleverer than any of the people surrounding me, and sometimes, would you believe it, have been positively ashamed of it. At any rate, I have all my life, as it were, turned my eyes away and could never look people straight in the face. To blame finally, because even if I had any magnanimity, I should only have more suffering from the sense of its uselessness. I should certainly never have been able to do anything from being magnanimous, neither to forgive, for my assailant would perhaps have slapped me from the laws of nature, and one cannot forgive the laws of nature nor to forget, for even if it were owing to the laws of nature, it's insulting all the same. Finally, even if I had wanted to be anything but magnanimous, had desired on the contrary to revenge myself on my assailant, I could not have revenged myself on anyone for anything, because I should certainly never have made up my mind to do anything, even if I had been able to. Why should I have not made up my mind? About that in particular, I want to say a few words. So ends chapter 2. Okay, tea poured. I hope you got yourself one. And it's time to talk about, I guess, some of the ideas and some of the dark themes that run through it. So the one that really strikes me above any other, and the thing that I just think is really tragic, is how the underground man has psychologically trapped himself in a state of despair, convincing himself that he's chosen to live in despair, and he prefers to live in despair because if he tried to do anything else, it would be futile. And what I think this represents is how people are habituated into a certain lifestyle, And once you've been habituated into a lifestyle, it's very hard to change that. And it's actually easier to stay, even if it's difficult, even if it's an unhealthy lifestyle or a lifestyle that doesn't serve you, it's easier to stay in those patterns that you've developed over 40 years in the underground man's case, versus taking the steps to change. And when you think about things in the way that the underground man thinks of things, he's thinking in huge terms. He thinks he's cleverer than everyone else that he meets. That can't be true. I'm sure he's very intelligent, he's very eloquent, but to think that he's more intelligent than everyone he meets, it's clearly verging on a delusion. And that delusion brings him comfort, and it helps him to explain his place in the world and why he's unhappy. But at the same time, it traps him in a prison of self-hatred, essentially, because he's not thinking, I could start going for a walk and appreciating nature a couple of times a week, and that will bring my life more value. He's not thinking about those small yet beautiful human moments that actually bring us joy and bring us value and add up over time to make us happier people. He's thinking about status, and he's thinking about his lack of status and how he's never going to be able to get any status in this world. And I think he's just very fixated on achieving external results, or in his case, the fact he can't achieve external results, but he can see all of the barriers that are in his way. And I mentioned it in a short, but there's this wonderful quote by Einstein where he talks about we have a choice between whether we live in a hostile world or a friendly world, and that simple choice is going to dictate how our life plays out. And this isn't any kind of magic. Obviously, Einstein is a great scientist. What he's talking about is the lens through which we see the world, and how the lens through which we see the world impacts our decisions and impacts our outcomes. Because, people talk about luck, but luck is something that's intangible. Luck is pretty much magic. But what Einstein's talking about is, if you're looking for the negative, if you're hyper-focused on the negative things about other people and the negative things about society and the world, that is what is going to inform your worldview, versus you're looking at the beauty, you're looking at the wonderfulness that is in human nature. You look for the good in people instead of looking for the bad in people, and that way you have a better experience of life. But it's not actually that simple a choice. It's certainly not a simple choice in any regard. Maybe for some people it is, but the interesting thing with the underground man is that we don't know about his background. We don't know about his childhood or how he became who he is. For people that have experienced trauma or a lot of hardship in their lives, of course you're going to see the world through a negative lens. It's going to be a lot harder and take a lot more effort to see the beauty and to see that people are kind and trustworthy. That takes a lot of effort, and it's actually a lot easier and a lot more commonplace that people will accept their lot and feel sorry for themselves, and then they get their dopamine hits out of feeling bad about themselves and feeling angry at the world. And I think it's interesting because this definitely, well, I don't know if it's proliferated in my lifetime per se, but we have so much more access now with the internet to see people's inner thoughts, to see what people really think and feel about things. And it seems like more of the population has the proclivities that the underground man has than I realized, and maybe than everyone realized. And I think it's funny because the underground man, he says, I just want to know, does anyone get this pleasure out of self-disgust? And obviously it's not the majority that feel like that. But in terms of people struggling with depression or personality disorders or any kind of mental health issue that drains your reserves, let's put it that way. Anyone with drained reserves is going to find it a lot harder to not fall into this trap that the underground man has fallen into. And I believe that's why Dostoevsky has shared this story with the world, and I believe it's why this story has endured and why it continues to resonate and be seen as such an important moment in literary history, because this lesson is never going to be irrelevant, no matter how technologically brilliant we get, no matter, if we manage to find world peace politically. People are going to have struggle, and people are going to respond badly to having those struggles, and it's going to shape their worldview and hamper their ability to have a better time in life. But as we know from Dostoevsky himself, who suffered extreme turmoil, extreme struggle. He had terrible illness, he was sentenced to death, he worked in labor camps for 4 years, hard labor camps in Siberia. He understood what it meant to struggle, and he'd probably seen a lot of men around him go the way of the underground man, and he probably saw them disintegrate as human beings, because really, truly, it's love and hope and beauty that keep us going and keep us striving and keep us surviving. And I think the underground man has given up on most elements of his life because he doesn't feel like there's any point in doing anything, in striving for more. And I think that's the thing. There's always a point, and that's where, this is where existentialism was born. No one's gonna give you the point. No one's gonna come and tell you what your purpose is. And I guess the point, or existentialists will say the point is to find out what your unique purpose is, and once you know what that is, then you're going to be able to spend your days doing things that help you live up to that purpose. And it doesn't matter how small they are. If you want to write a book, or if you want to be an amazing painter, it takes a small amount of practice every day, consistently, over a long time, to get really good. And no matter what it is, no matter what skill you want to develop, that is the secret to everything. So when the underground man says, oh no, it's pointless, there's no point in trying, that is the ultimate fallacy that our mental health and our, entrenched attitudes can tell us. And I just love this story so much for putting into words what I think a lot of people probably feel, and it's coming from someone whose words have endured for all of this time. So it really is a very special book indeed. And I guess the one other thing I would say that I've only noticed on this read, actually, of Notes from the Underground so far, is how much Franz Kafka must have been inspired by Notes from the Underground. The underground man keeps talking about, I couldn't even be an insect. He talks about insects a lot, and it really reminds me of Metamorphosis, which is another one of my absolute favourite novels of all time. We'll definitely read it together. I think that wraps up what we have to say about Notes from the Underground and the darker themes that we've explored. Of course, throughout the week I will release some shorts, because I do tend to think of, oh, that was so good, I wish I said that. So I'll pop those out as shorts, and maybe do some more time to lyrics as well, because these things pop up into my head. Things remind me of lyrics. I'm thinking about 9 Inch Nails and the downward spiral and its parallels to Notes from the Underground at the moment. I'm getting far too excited about it. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today for Classic Lit Storytime. I hope you had a lovely tea, and I hope you enjoyed the reading. I can't wait to see you again next week. Love you, bye!